So here we go. Hello, broadband cable professionals. Welcome to the SCT Golden Gate Chapter YouTube channel. In early 2025, the Sierra and Golden Gate chapters agreed to a proposal to recognize individuals for their contributions to both our industry and the SCT. From this proposal evolved the Broadband Founders Club. Today, we'll be talking to one of our first 4 Broadband Founder Club inductees, Steve Allen. Steve's had a lifelong career in our industry in various roles. Additionally, Steve was deeply involved in SCTE, serving both on our local boards and roles in the national level. And I might add, the founder of what is now known as Vendors Day. Now almost every chapter has their own Vendors Day. So good morning, Steve. How are you?
Good morning, Woody. It's good to see you again. How are you, my friend?
Good to see you too. You're looking great. What have you been up to this morning? What does your typical morning look like?
Well, other than wrestling with Zoom, which is yeah, it's a normal retired morning. I got up late, I had breakfast, and took a shower, and didn't work right. So retired life.
Excellent. So, Steve, tell us a little bit how you found your way into this industry. I think back in those days it was called CATV. It was when I started, and I started much later than you. But tell us a little bit about how you got involved in our industry.
I'm probably one of the people who has been in this literally my entire life. My father was one of the very first cable operators, starting a small system back in Minnesota. And we had 3 channels. I was 5 years old at the time, and he used to send me out with installers to do installs and crawl under houses. I learned how to climb telephone poles, even though the climbers were above my knees but it was a fascinating time. After high school, I was involved with it, since the beginning. And moving on through my career, moved to California, went to high school, and then upon my graduation from high school, I went to work for Concord TV Cable as a part-time summer vacation replacement. I've really literally, I think, done every job. From auditing to installs to technical to construction, hardline construction, underground construction, head-end construction, antennas, head-end technician. Done, engineering staff, engineering manager, national engineering manager for various companies around Northern California, including Viacom and McClatchy and Jones Intercable and Western Communications. So my whole career has really been in Northern California, but I've literally been there and done that over my 47 years of active CATV involvement.
Yeah, I'd have to say you've probably done more roles and worked for more companies than anyone I know in this industry. And I certainly don't know a lot, but I know a few. And that is just a vast array of different positions and so many companies. That's amazing.
I never worked for TCI, nor did I ever work for Comcast, so I missed out on a couple of the big ones. But I was happy being a small system operator.
Yeah, like many. So tell us uh, tell us a little bit about any high points or low points or laughable moments that you had in your career.
Oh, let's see. One that comes to mind is I was working in Concord on the first rebuild from 12 channels to 20 channels in the mid 70s. And this was a midnight to 8 type of job where you had to turn the system off. And I'm working up in a bucket truck, one of the very first bucket trucks the cable industry had at the time. Before that, we were all in vans on hooks. But I was
Yeah,
on a
first.
telephone pole about 5 o'clock in the morning, working under a trouble light, changing amplifier. And I hear this noise coming up the street. And there are a lot of strange people out there at those early morning hours. So I had learned from previous experience to turn off the light and kind of hug the pole. And the coming up the street is a is a guy wearing unlaced combat boots, a pair of white underwear, and with a machete, screaming at the top of his lungs and whacking limbs off of trees along the sidewalk. And so I kind of, rather than attracting any kind of attention, I just sort of hugged the pole and watched him come up to the corner and turn right and run down the other block in the other direction. And I kind of made it a point to scoot down and get out of there because I wasn't sure if he was going to come back.
Uh,
The other event, kind of during the same time, is I had somebody steal my bucket truck. I was
oh,
up on the pole at the time,
uh-huh.
yeah, and I was up in the dark, and here's this nice bucket truck sitting at the base of the pole with the engine running and the headlights on to keep it to keep everything operating. And next thing I hear the door slam, and I'm going down the street. And I've got the bucket up there, and I managed to take out a couple well, I did take out a few cable drops and telephone drops, and screaming and yelling at the top of my lungs from the whoever it was stole it, heard it, and I realized there was somebody there, and he slammed on the brakes, almost throwing me out of the bucket, and stopped and stopped the truck and ran away. I came down just shaking. I'm glad that we
Oh
didn't
my
cross an
goodness.
intersection where there was strand or something that would have probably cut me in half. But
Oh shoot.
every cable guy, I'm sure, has got a lot of interesting stories to tell. Everything from animals underneath houses to finding porn and guns in the attics.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
it's been very interesting.
Oh yeah, there's plenty of wild stories to tell. Any low points that you'd like to share?
Any what?
Low points? You
Oh,
have any?
low
Yeah.
points. Oh,
Uh-huh.
I guess one of my low points was during the same rebuild. I had a $1,000 standby power supply sitting on the back of of my bucket truck, and I'm going down the street to go put a power supply in, and this dog runs across the street right in front of me, and I hit the brakes, hit the air brakes on this T40, and the next thing I know, I saw a power supply doing a tumble doing just
Yeah.
spinning,
Uh,
standby power supply spinning down, bouncing off the asphalt. And I wound up paying for that one because I had not strapped it down sufficiently to handle an emergency braking. So that was kind of a low point.
yeah, that is definitely a low point.
Yeah, and um, no, I've loved my career in cable. I don't have
Yeah.
very many low points to talk about.
Yeah.
Everything was always up and bigger and better. You show the initiative, and if you show the interest, you have to love it. I mean, there were, for a long time it was a job, and then one day I decided to make it a career. And once I
Hmm.
made that career decision, everything opened up and changed because I knew which direction I wanted to go, and I focused my efforts on that. And good things, more good things really started to happen then.
Yeah, I think that goes to say for many of us in the business, there was plenty of opportunities and it was a growing industry for many decades. So you just, yeah, if you had the initiative and motivation, you could do a lot.
And we were generalists.
Uh-huh.
We did everything at
Uh-huh.
those times. There was, even as an engineering manager, I occasionally had to go out and do disconnects. Nowadays, it's so specialized. If you're a fiber splicer or if you're a network engineer, that's your job. If your job is to put the gas cap on the airplane, that's what you do. Back then, we did everything. So, in fact, that's the BCTE program that we had was really geared around the generalist, all the categories that we had to learn and test on. We're a very broad knowledge base.
Yes, I would have to say that's a significant difference between people these days is yeah, they're in columns, so to speak, and their
Silos.
mobility is typically upward, like straight upward, where back in when we started, there was just a lot of different things. You never knew when went into work what you'd be doing that
Exactly.
day. You
We did
do
it all.
whatever was necessary, whatever was the burning issue as you worked on, right?
Yeah, even outages
So,
were interesting. We would sit there in Concord under the roll-up door, watch the lightning come through town, and we knew we were going to work at that point because at the time,
mhm.
amplifiers, used 3 amp fuses, and you would blow a fuse someplace and you were off and running.
Yeah, I I remember having loads of fuses in your pockets because especially during uh, storms, you're going to be going through a lot of fuses.
I drove my wife
Uh,
crazy by always coming home somehow with 5 or 6 F fittings in my shirt pocket, and they would wind up in the washing machine. And probably like every other cable guy, I had a large jar in the laundry room, full of miscellaneous cable parts. And
Yeah.
periodically, I'd return them all to my supply.
So, so Steve, if you wouldn't mind, tell me about how did you get involved in the SCTE?
I was working up in Oroville as the chief technician, and at the time there was really no school other than OJT or learning from somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a magazine called CATJ, Cable Television Journal, and it was the first attempt at some type of a publication. And somewhere in there, I read about this new training organization called the SCTE, Society of Cable Television Engineers, and it looked interesting. And I mean, I was always seeking further education in it. Like I said, there were no classes, there was no school, there was nothing that you could call a resource. You could read the tech manuals and the instruction manuals from the vendors and stuff and try to learn things, but there was a lack of real information. The SCT came on the scene at the right time, and I joined the SCTE with the hopes of finding out more. At the time there were no chapters. You basically
Mm-hmm.
joined it and you got a membership card. And I am now a member of the SCP, but there was no backup structure at the time, and it wasn't long after that, maybe a year or so, when the Golden Gate chapter was established. It was one of the first early chapters in the Bay Area. Was very, very active. I mean, I credit the Golden Gate chapter with representing the huge workforce of people that we had surrounding the Bay Area and the multiple companies that were represented at the time. And their leadership and the structure and their relationship with the vendors really started to take off in the education sense. We really started to get some good training on the developments that were coming. It was the right thing at the right time, and I much appreciated it.
Yeah, yes, it's been an outstanding organization, and I certainly remember when we used to go to training at like um, hotel conference rooms and had vendors come and give out details and suppliers and people in the industry. So it was fantastic. And
Good. Yeah,
because the
well,
training you got besides the OJT, you only learned is your learning was only as good as the person teaching you, which sometimes wasn't that great.
but there were a lot of actually really, really good people. One of the
there,
things I
there,
remember
there,
most about the
there was
meetings
a
was great lunches we used to put on. We used to have tri-tip steak and beans for lunch, and everybody came to come for the food and stay for the education.
That's right. Yeah, that was the attraction, and people came and they learned a lot through SCT. I know I did. So tell me about the different roles you filled in the SCT. I know you wore many hats in your involvement.
I've always wanted to try to give it back, and I was always interested in the education of the people working around me. The better they were, the better I would be. It was always about spreading the education. So I was a very strong supporter of SCT, even in my own office where I was the chief technician. All of my employees were members. I paid for them and got them to the classes because it was how we did a better job of our work. I started off. Um, being asked to serve on the Golden Gate chapter by P. Petrovich, and this was probably back in 1984. Like I said, I remember it was kind of coincided with the Challenger disaster, but that's the timestamp on it. I
Hmm.
was vice president of the Golden Gate chapter and worked on putting on classes in Livermore or down at the fairgrounds and wherever we were. Um, but a short time after that, I relocated. I quit and I went back to the Sacramento Valley. I wound up as the engineering manager for the cable system in Roseville, California, by Sacramento. And this is when Sacramento
Hmm.
was just starting out to be built. And I wound up saying, okay, well, I enjoyed the Golden Gate, but it's too far. So I contacted, said, hey, how about we start one here? And I asked around the neighborhood, and found engineering managers and chief techs at some of the other myriad of cable systems in the valley. And we put together a board, and I founded the Sierra meeting group, later to become the Sierra chapter of the SCT. So I was the founder and first president of the Sierra chapter. That was my first, direct involvement in the leadership aspect of it, other than being vice president. But that began a long-term relationship with the SCTE, and which I was very actively involved. California was incredibly active. We had the largest, between Sacramento and the Bay Area, we had the largest group or concentration of membership in the entire SCTE. We were the flagship systems. I wound up, I think the dates kind of fade me now, but somehow I wound up being the regional director for a couple of terms. I wound up being the Western vice chairman of the SCTE, and I was scheduled, if you want to call it that. I was, in line to be chairman of the SCTE when Comcast bought out AT&T. And
Okay.
at a meeting there, I basically pulled Wayne Hall aside, who was the engineer for Comcast, and I said, "Hey, look, Wayne, as much as I would like to be chairman, I think it's your time, because you are taking over, the largest cable operation in the country, and I think that your leadership will matter to everybody from the standpoint of your job." So Wayne became the chairman, and I kind of stepped back a little bit, and I'm very proud of that, and I'm very proud of the job that Wayne did. He was the right person at the right time for that. Coincidentally with that, I mean, as I'm seeing the inner workings of the SCT and the education outreach, we had the Cable Tech Expos. We had the new technology meetings, and we had the Cable Tech Expo every year. And I said, God, this is a great place to go to. I get to see and touch everything. And as the engineering manager of my system, I used to have vendors coming in all the time, and they would show me their trinkets and their stuff, and I'd take me to lunch, and but it never, and I would try to pass it down, but you don't get much feedback that way. So I said, what if we could do this on a local level somehow? What if we could bring these vendors together from our, rather than having them come into the office one at a time, what if we got them all together in some place and marched all of our troops in there for coffee and donuts in the morning and let them look around? And out of that came the idea for Vendors Day. It wasn't originally called Vendors Day. They wouldn't let me call it Tech Expo. We negotiated a name called Vendors Day, and the title of it made it pretty clear what it was. And so I got out the California Cable Television Association Associates Handbook or Guidebook directory that they had, start mailing letters to all of the names in the back of the book that were associates, which were vendors, and saying, "Hey, we're going to try to do this for $10, at such and such a location. Will you come and meet everybody?" And surprisingly, we had 50 vendors show up for our first one,
Wow.
and we had a couple of hundred, I think, associates or people show up for it. It was a very, very crude, very first-time experiment, but it got better. We moved into, it was enough of a success that we wanted to do it again. And so we wound up moving to a new location at the Holiday Inn in Fairfield. It was a nice central spot around Northern California. And at the peak, from Fairfield, we moved it to Concord, because again, the large percentage of the membership was in the Bay Area. And so the closer we were to the workplace, the more they could send somebody down for a morning or an afternoon, rather than having to take a whole day off and spend a time driving. So it worked out well for us. I remember at the peak, the last year I was chairman of Vendors Day, we had 125 vendors and over 1,000 people attend the meeting. And I celebrated that by, at the games or at the reception afterwards, I celebrated that by hauling out these big tables of jumbo shrimp that they used to serve at the Playboy Channel down in Los Angeles at the Western Show, because to me it was an indication of a sign of success. So those disappeared real fast, but that was kind of the high point, at least of my time with it. So I really considered that to be a success. The idea of taking the training to the membership of the vendors, the vendors loved it, because they got feedback on their products. They got suggestions for new ideas. They were talking to the guys on the ground and on the streets and in the houses, and so much innovation and stuff came out of Vendors Day. Those engineers would take what they would learn from people and take it back and say, hey, to their engineering department, say, hey, they really need this or they want this. And many good developments for our industry came out of that relationship between the guys on the street and the guys in the labs. And I'm very proud of that contribution.
Yes, I'd have to say the vendors these days, they have somebody at nearly every Vendors Day show, and there's a lot of them.
There's still a lot of them.
So yeah. Although there's been a lot of consolidation with vendors, so
Yeah.
not as many vendors, but there's a lot of shows. So
Yeah.
those folks are showing up at all these shows.
Yeah. It was so successful that the SCT called me back to their spring leadership conference, whatever it was, and I put on a session on how to hold vendors days. And
Okay.
at that time, the chapters had no way to raise money. We weren't charging dues for anybody. Even the Golden Gate chapter had a hard time getting a mailing out because we didn't have enough money for postage because we had no money. And so Vendors Day solved that problem for the entire society. All of a sudden, Vendors Days were the way for membership and local chapters to finance their operations. With the willing cooperation of the vendors, I might add. They thought it was a great, it was a great value. I mean, when I first had them, it was $10, and then it became $50 because we had to pay for power. We had to get power to all these people, and all of a sudden, the expenses started going up. So I raised it to $50 a table. And but out of it, we were able to pay the hotel and do everything, and still we distributed all of the money to the participating chapters, and they walked away with some pretty good checks to sustain their operations. And out of that came golf tournaments and cable games and all kinds of spin-offs from what was a simple tabletop show.
Yes, that definitely inspired a lot of fundraising, and chapters have been a lot more healthy because we were just kind of at everybody's mercy when we first started.
Absolutely.
Like I said, we just didn't, just struggling to find enough funds to pay for stamps.
Yeah, now you're able to pay for scholarships and incentives.
Yes.
It's been a real strong point for the SCTE.
Yes. So, Steve, a personal question. Do you have a bucket list now that you're retired? And have you worked on that bucket list? Have you done anything exciting?
I have a bucket list, but I want to see the national parks. I want to go out and visit Zion and Yellowstone, and I really want to do that. But between gas prices and having a house full of animals, between horses, dogs, and cats, not to mention ground squirrels and turkeys,
Yeah.
it's hard to get away for an extended period of time to do something. We had an RV for a while and found out we didn't use it enough because we just couldn't get away from 5 acres of ranch to do it. If I lived in an apartment, maybe it would be better, but I really do like my rural living out here.
Okay.
It does influence me. So fortunately, I've got a small cottage up at Lake Tahoe that we go to a lot, so I can get away from here on the hot days.
Excellent. Well, sounds like you set yourself up for a wonderful retirement.
So far, so good.
Excellent. Well, Steve, I just want to thank you for all your contributions to the industry and the SCT, and say congratulations for being one of the first 4 inductees into the Broadband Founders Club. We hope to see you at our next Vendors Day. I'm going to try to work to set up some kind of meeting with the group, and maybe a breakfast or a coffee, so we maybe can talk to others. And I want to make sure I get to you the link to nominate another person, because it sounds like a lot of people that had a lot of influence, many names that I don't even know, and I've been around for 40 plus years myself, but in kind of in the same industry, in the same technical field, but being in South Bay, Monterey Bay areas, I kind of knew a group of different people than you did.
I look forward to it. I missed Vendors Day this year due to a conflict of a scheduling conflict, but I'll be back next year.
Excellent. Well,
First
it'll
time.
be wonderful to see you there, and it'll be hopefully wonderful to see who you nominate for this prestigious position. So again, thank you for taking time for this interview, and until next time, we will we'll see. And thanks to all of those folks for watching. And it's been a pleasure talking to Steve, and hopefully a lot of people get to watch this interview. And we'll be adding more interviews to this to the Golden Gate Chapter YouTube channel. So if you wouldn't mind, hit that like button and subscribe so you'll get notifications when we post a new recording. So thank you, everyone.